Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for today's webinar, Ready, Set, Go, Implementing the C3 Framework in Your District. I am your host, Jessica Hayes, and we are joined today by our presenters, Scott Berman and Kate Swan. So I'm going to now turn it over to Scott and Kate to get us started.
Welcome, everybody. We're going to work through a couple of slides. It's going to take about an hour. I'll handle the first part of the presentation, then I'll hand over to Kate, and let's get started. What we're talking about today is we're talking about moving a district from content-based social studies instruction into skills-based social studies instruction. And I have to say right up front that I've only been in this position a few years. What you're hearing today is very much Kate's story. It's a story that Kate started and continues to steward through this process. I'll let Kate just introduce herself super quick, and then we'll proceed.
Thank you so much, Scott. So as he shared, I am Kate Swan. I have been in Washington County and in the content specialist position for a number of years. And we're just excited today to have the opportunity to talk with you about how we began the shift to a skills-based curricula starting in 2015. So we're going to take the next 50 minutes and talk about that. In order for us to frame out our goals and our session for the day, Scott's going to give you our essential question and the three big areas of focus.
Our essential question today, and we'll see this at the end of our presentation as well, how can the shift to a skills-based curriculum be used to facilitate a common understanding of and approach to effective social studies instruction? So we're going to break this up into three different sections. We're going to look at the phases of curriculum revision, basically how we, not pen and paper necessarily, but through the creation of documents and the creation of belief statements, to use that term, we moved from content to skills. And then in the second section, we'll look at how we nurtured that. You can create all the greatest documents in the world. You can have the greatest ideas in the world. If teachers don't use them on a daily basis, it's not very effective, right? So we'll look at that in step 2. And in step 3, we'll answer any questions and clarify, and our contact information will be available. You can always follow up with us, and we help them as the best we can.
Thank you, Scott. Welcome, everybody. We're thankful that you're here to join us, and we know that you want to talk about this shift and the focus on curriculum. Regardless of where you are in the process, we want to spend some time talking about getting off the ground and how we in Washington County Public Schools established the curriculum. It's important to know that we did that with an understanding by design focus, and we had some really specific recommendations for planning for you if you're along that same journey. What we want to start off with is what happened in National Council for Social Studies in 2013 and the restructuring that Scott mentioned in Washington County Public Schools in 2014. This was a game changer for all of us, right? We started to think about the discipline differently. And in Washington County, it coalesced perfectly with the restructuring of our central office. At that time period, we were challenged with finding a way to more effectively address curriculum in an integrated way. We moved away from English having its own content and supervisor leadership role. Social studies, math, science, etc. were blended into a humanities and a STEM team. And within those teams, we worked to completely reorganize the curriculum team, and 10 content specialists were hired. Through that process, we also began to think about how we could shift towards a skills-based curriculum by adapting our expectations to meet those that were published by NCSS. We know that the inquiry arc includes 4 dimensions. Those dimensions represent the essential components of historical thinking, not necessarily only what we'll learn, but how we will ask our students to think about it and what our curriculum itself should represent. Maryland, being Maryland, has gone about this in a way that is maybe unique or maybe similar to where you are. We utilize not the C3 framework in its entirety, but college and career readiness standards for both reading and writing, and we use standard 6.0 across our inquiry arc, which you can see here highlighted at the bottom, which represents our skills and processes. We do things a little differently here, but the idea behind a skills-based curricula is the same. So in our documents today, or in the samples that you may explore in the future, if you see us reference standard 6.0, you're going to be thinking about inquiry and skills-based standards, which are representative of the C3 framework. Those are the same types of ideas and disciplinary skill sets, but our state requires us to look at it a bit differently. And with this as the backbone of our curricular work, we really really dove in to thinking about how we could restructure curriculum. So we're going to talk through a couple phases. At this chunk, we're going to look at these center years of our work. For those of you that say you're 3 years in the process, we're going to talk about some of the revisions we did during the middle of that. For those of you that are just starting, think about the goals that you have for 5 years down the road. What are the steps that you might need to fill in to get to that point? And reach out when you have questions. So for us, as I said, this work started in 2015. We pulled together over 100 different teachers, as Scott said. They came in collaboratively, and we actually contracted with Jay McTighe. He came in and he worked with the teacher teams, but especially with the content specialist teams. He helped us to understand transfer tasks and the tenets of UBD. That might not be the direction you want to go in, and that's okay. But we chose to write our own curricula because we needed teacher buy-in and we needed to balance skill with the content that we already did well. We started that out in phase 1 in 2015 to write and develop tasks. In 2016, we built a little bit more by building out curricular units beyond just our assessments. And through 2017 and 18, our efforts focused on building and communicating a common vision. We had the teacher leaders who wrote and revised the curriculum create foundational documents that helped to communicate clear vision and tenets of social studies instruction to all stakeholders, whether they were involved in curricular revisions or whether they were an administrator or whether they were just hired this year. We could clearly communicate what our goals and our values were and how they were reflected in the curriculum. So we're going to jump in and look at those 3 phases with a little more specificity. Phase 1, we only had 25 social studies teachers. They worked collaboratively, and it was several months of a process. This was something, as I mentioned, that required a lot of funding. We did this through our Title II grant here in Maryland. That was funding that we set aside because we knew this was coming. We worked with Jay McTighe, and we worked through 4 processes. The first thing that we did was establish our transfer goal. These are 4 big K-12 goals, things that kids need to accomplish and do, skills-based, not content, by the time they walk out of our social studies classes. We wrote them, we refined them, and then we said, how do I measure it? And we wrote performance-based assessments around it, again, developed by teachers. The content and the structure of the assessments varied because it was based on what was most important to assess for that transfer goal. We wrote scoring rubrics that correlated with the standards that represented transfer. And that looked different at a middle school and a high school level. And then we were able to modify those to meet the needs of our cornerstone tasks. And lastly, we piloted our work with a group of teachers. Scott was working at a school in an administrative role at that time period, but still experienced and leading the social studies department. He was one of the individuals who piloted and worked with teachers and students through the pilot process. They gave feedback, they looked through the directions, and they told us what worked and what stunk. And it wasn't all very good. But through that process, we looked at the work that had been completed, we looked at the student performance, and we were able to identify areas of success and things that need changed. And through that, we also built student anchors, which provided teachers with a glimpse of what success looked like. And we provided them with a tutorial of what to do if their kids got stuck. That became our if-then guide. And truly, in this first phase, we were really focused on identifying transfer and figuring out how we could measure it. We built cornerstone tasks and assessments, and we revised them. This took a whole year, and it was really rigorous work. But in the end of the year, we had a product and a series of measurement scores to be able to say what we expected out of our kids from grade 6 to 12. Here's a picture of our transfer goals. Scott's going to share with you just a quick discussion question.
You'll notice that in these transfer goals, there's not a single date to memorize. There's not a single person listed. And these transfer goals anchor really everything that we do. Hopefully you've had a chance to read 1 or maybe 2, or maybe you've had a chance to read the one in the center, which is kind of the overarching transfer goal. The question is, did you create progressions for each of these?
Yes, we are going to talk about progressions. And we found that the transfer goals themselves are lofty, right? They're huge. They're big. What does that look like in first grade versus for us, an 11th grade top of the course requirement or an AP student? They are deep skills, but it looks different in each grade level. So we did talk about that. Our fourth transfer goal is almost identical to our English counterparts goal. We focus on specific types of writing and communication. They do as well, but they look a little different in our discipline, and paying respect to that is essential. So you're going to see some of these pieces, and we're going to hit on that progression. But I want to talk about the next step, because honestly, we didn't quite get to the progression because we didn't know what we needed. We just were trying to figure it out. In phase 2, our teachers told us that they needed resources. They knew that the shift to skills was important. They knew that the shift away from content was tough, but they couldn't figure out how to integrate skills without this phrase: we do that already. And when I heard we do that already, it was not like they could specify what they were doing. They were just rethink like historians. And the challenge is that they as educators did, but they as students did not. And so we started in overhaul phase 2, figuring out how to integrate resources that met the desired results or our learning outcomes. How did we get the kids to the standards that represented transfer goals? And for you, on this particular slide, right here, you're going to see the vertically aligned transfer goals. We selected specific standards that represent each of these transfer goals. And that's what we built rubrics around that grounded our cornerstone tasks, and as Scott said, largely everything we do. So from the tasks that were built, from the priority standards that went with each transfer goal, we kind of tweaked the assessments, and in 2016 built modules that specified if these are the transfer goals, these are the content standards, and these are the skills that you can use to meet the requirements of our state curriculum, because the state does expect us to teach content and skill. Those instructional outlines were paired with resources like those from Active Classroom. We got rid of our textbooks, folks. Done. People hated that, but we gave them a tool like Active Classroom. We supported them with content-aligned, skills-rich learning experiences, which you can also find through DBQ, through Stanford's SHEG resources like Beyond the Bubble. You can look at Choices and Library of Congress. We know College Board, ThinkPort, all these things were integrated into our curriculum as tools, not as requirements, not as a you must teach in a march lockstep order, but in a way that gave teachers freedom within fences. Use these resources, meet these desired results so that your students can succeed on these assessments.
You brought up an excellent point, and it's something that I wanted to just tease out a little bit. Beware, and I'm sure you guys know this, beware of the phrase, we do this already. That is a trap among traps that teachers do. And look, it's really important that we acknowledge and we validate what teachers do already, because many of them, if not all of them, are engaging in some type of skills-based instruction. Right? But that should never be the ending point of the conversation. We do this already, but let's do this better. We need to continue that.
I love that you bring that up too, because it was not us. It was our teachers that said, we need some tools to make this work more effectively. And they were the ones that, again, selected the tools that correlated with the goals that they had selected the years prior. So through the summer of 2015 and across the year of 2016, we pulled teams of teachers who were motivated, interested, and willing to try something new, quite honestly. We had a mix of veterans and brand new folks. And if they were willing to try, we were willing to work with them. We integrated resources, we built modules, and they spanned the whole year. We had 4. They were huge, 45 days of instruction in one plan, but it was in the right direction because it gave some recommendations. And then we found that people needed some time to breathe and some time to adjust. And in year 3, the people who hadn't quite jumped on board started to make some noise. Some noise questioning, was it working? Should I join in? And if so, why? And that's where we moved into the point where we felt it was essential to communicate a common vision. What was social studies going to be in our district? And how did we ensure that everyone, from principals to content specialists to classroom teachers and parents, knew that it wasn't reading a textbook and citing dates because that's what it had been when they were in school? And so we created 2 foundational tools that have driven us forward. The first of which is our disciplinary literacy philosophy. This outlines the tenets of what we believe social studies should include. It's got overarching belief statements, and it also has varying statements and actions that correlate with it. The first one I'm going to share with you simply because it's my favorite. Historical inquiry is an integral component of effective social studies instruction. Therefore, we will use essential questions to frame units of study and develop necessary scaffolding so that students can examine issues of substance and interest. That's what we do. Why shouldn't our curricula support that? We also worked to develop a skillful learning progression, a skillful progression that began to identify what it would look like at each grade, 6 to 8, 9 to 10, and 11 to 12 when it comes to college and career readiness standard, as well as our individual progressions. We wanted to spell out what it looked like. How do our teachers know how to teach skills when they find themselves in a banded standard working with a 6th grade student? They can't expect them to meet the top level of that standard. We brought together our curriculum writers, some folks who were now interested but didn't really know what they were doing, AP teachers, and folks who wanted to start doing the work at a deeper level to begin exploring and explaining what each specific historical thinking skill set could represent. And we landed on 5 specific skill sets that represented the heart of our discipline. We landed on sourcing, contextualization, corroboration. We built out the idea of inquiry, and we framed what effective evidence of learning would be. Not only did we define that, but we provided specific expectations for performance at each grade level, giving students and teachers a picture of what success looked like within each of those skill sets. This was a game changer for our team and for our teachers because it took something that to date had been abstract and something we do already, and it broke it down into specific actions and behaviors that could be observable and coachable with students. It removed the confusion and the barrier of what we expected. And when you are clear with your kids, with your stakeholders, with your teachers, with your administrators, and when you can say to parents, we're not teaching your kids what to think, but we are empowering them with the skill sets so that they can think and inform their own opinions, then we're doing the discipline justice as it deserves. And these 2 things, as mentioned, were game changers for us because they worked together. The disciplinary literacy philosophy fed into our instructional progressions. It shows that if I'm going to use inquiry, these are the things my kids need to do. And I don't know how to plan for that. So maybe I should be working with someone else. And we, as a district, developed common planning protocols and recommendations for how to think about skills-based planning. Scott, I see you want to chime in, so I'm going to pause.
So when we think about the historical skills progressions, the first 3 are the kind of the big 3 of our discipline: sourcing, corroboration, and contextualization. And those are lifted directly from the pages of Sam Weinberg. And honestly, Sam, he kind of put a name to those things, but they have been researched and thought about in Germany and in England and in Canada, for a very long time. To be honest with you, it's easy to teach a date. It's easy to teach who Andrew Jackson was, right? It's easy to teach facts about Abraham Lincoln, right? It's more challenging to teach skills, and it's even more challenging to be really descriptive about what those skill levels are from a grade to grade. So that's difficult, but just because something is difficult doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it, right? We can't fall back on our laurels and say, wow, this is too hard to figure out. And that's really what Kate and when she worked with the teachers, that's what they really looked at doing, is taking the theoretical, right? And taking the sketches and the ideas and then being very kind of clear and very discrete about what those performance levels should be from grade to grade. So we're really trying to take the research that is backed in quantitative evidence and put it into practice on a daily basis in our classroom.
I definitely would have established that grounding component first. Yes. We as a curriculum team started to know what was important to us, and that was represented by our transfer goals. That was represented by the priority standards that the curricular team selected and incorporated in all the work they did. But when it came to people outside of that team, or the people who may have pushed back and not embraced the curricular shift, that's where the philosophy. That's where the progression really began to give us a ground to make growth, because we could point to what we believed and where it was represented in the curriculum. And that correlated with the research. It represented what was happening in the national trends. And because of that, it allowed us to kind of bring some of those more hesitant individuals on board, because even if they didn't believe me, the research supported what was happening. And other individuals, quite honestly, in the community started saying that the curriculum was allowing their kids to think in different ways and that they were feeling successful in the classroom. Year 3 gave us a chance to brag about what the other people had done in year 1 and 2 with greater clarity, because we could say we understood why it was working. I hope that answers your question. Scott, you've got a question.
Yeah, so in the chat, and you guys have already kind of talked about this, but this is an important component. It's about shifting the mindset, right? You can institute all the policies you want. You're really not going to move anywhere unless you can shift people's minds. And there are teachers that are hesitant. There are teachers that maybe aren't hesitant but can't find the words or actions to follow through. So think about the mindset of your team or your school district as it relates to an inquiry-based curriculum. To be honest with you, even in our district, I mean, we have some teachers that are on one side of the spectrum and some teachers that are on the other. But one of the things that we've done, and Kate will talk about this a little bit later, is we've really started to drill down and provide tailored professional development for our high-achieving teachers, right? We have one type of professional development for them. And for our striving teachers, we'll say, we have another type of professional development for them. And there's some folks that don't attend professional development outside the normal school day. So we have another type of professional development for them.
When we designed the transfer goals, when we designed the cornerstone assessments, and when we looked at rubrics that could connect the dots between grade levels, we thought about that. How are teachers practicing those common skills and having common conversations? Because when it comes down to it, if you don't know who won World War II, I can take a quick pause in my instruction, backfill some content, give you a little bit of context, and I can move on. But if you are significantly lacking a particular skill set, if you can't identify source, date, place, author, origin, then you certainly can't elevate yourself to a sourcing skill set where I'm asking you to identify the credibility and the relevance of a source, because those things are related, but one is a more higher level thinking skill. And as a teacher, I've got to know where you are so I can get you further down that progression. And we definitely worked towards that, but it wasn't an easy sell with everyone. I can say that at this point, we've got people who are talking a common language. I went into a classroom this week with a teacher who I can say is my proudest area of growth. This individual has been in the classroom for a great number of years and sells himself short every chance he gets. He works with 6th grade kids who in our county, the last full year of school that they had was in 3rd grade. And this is the 7th day of school. I was in his class last week, and he has kids using words like corroboration, contextualization, and identifying and defining bias in his classroom on day 6 in 6th grade. And that is a huge win. And I think that we can continue to see things like that, because if our teachers see other colleagues finding success, then we continue to build that through the work that we do. And in 2019 and 2020, 21, things got hairy for all of us, all over the country, all over the globe. But we started some big work prior to the pandemic that paid off and allowed us to continue to see successes while we were quarantined and while we were at a distance. It's important to note that we have a one-to-one, started as an iPad initiative and is now a Chromebook initiative. So every student in Washington County does have a personal device. That is why you see us capable of integrating several resources and using Active Classroom, DBQ, and other digital tools to deploy our skills-based curricula. In 2019 and 2020, we shrunk things. We took those huge 45-day instructional unit modules and we made them manageable because we heard that they weren't. And our people told us they were too big to digest, and that's where they were floundering. So we responded to what they said. Again, guided by teacher feedback, school needs, we took additional resources and we broke them into model units. This graphic kind of shows how the essential curriculum is narrowed into model units, and then teachers took those units and planned their instructional progressions in their classroom. The model units were suggested outlines. They provided smaller instructional chunks and resources for anywhere between 5 and 15 days. Teachers still had to do their daily plans. I didn't know their kids, their classroom, their teaching style, but they do. We also gave them a template because people were planning all over the place, really still focused on content, teaching all the stuff they couldn't get away from, and not focusing on how to scaffold and support skills. So we put a specific piece in there asking them to think about sourcing, contextualization, corroboration, and inquiry. And we asked them to give their kids various ways to show what they knew. Lastly, we created new writing rubrics to give us a common language to score. These were representative of some of the expectations on the MCAP assessment, which is the Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program, which for the first time is giving us an 8th grade history assessment representative of skill sets, which are now also included on our 10th grade government assessment, which is a graduation requirement in our state. Through this focus, we increased common language. What's important to teach? What's not? And how do I know if kids are performing effectively? That led us into a 2019 where we were quarantined and where we had some focus for instruction. We also received a ton of teacher feedback that indicated that we needed to modify the unit even more over this last instructional year. We provided priority standards and diagnostic assessments. We made videos because we weren't with people when they wanted to start planning. And the videos talked to them about some of the important changes that would help them to streamline their job and focus on skill sets, even though they had less time than ever before to teach content. We told them which content was most essential to teach and helped them to feel comfortable with leaving some things behind. And this year, at the request of our teachers, primarily individuals who were hired and struggled to move to concurrent teaching, where we had kids in front of us and kids at a distance, we were asked to do enhanced instructional guidance. To some teachers, this felt like too much, but for others, and now that they're in it, this is exactly what they've been asking us for. And again, to your question earlier, Lori, something I would have done way earlier if I had known how much impact it would have made. We provided objectives aligned with the state. They married skill and content, so it was a two-part objective, telling you not what the kid's going to do, but how they're going to learn it and how they're going to demonstrate that skill. We talked about timing, recommended resources, and we embedded assessments and a variety of different scaffolds, disciplinary literacy extensions, and strategies to differentiate for struggling learners and for kids that were gifted, because we know we have them all in our classroom. This was the huge work that we did this summer. It is something that required focus, but it is something that in each of my experiences in talking with our new teachers, they have found to be incredibly helpful. Scott, go ahead. Ooh, you don't have access. I'll change that right now. Thank you. Scott, did you want to go ahead or want me to click?
Yeah, go ahead.
The next one is merely your questions. And I know we've got about 10 minutes left. And I know there's a lot of PD stuff in there too, right? Like, because you can't just roll out a new curriculum. But we want to take some questions about the curricular piece. And we want to do that well so that we can close effectively. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah. So Kate, before we open up the floor, do you mind going to the essential question just so we can remind folks where we've been driving?
Yes, I can do that for you.
So when we started about 50 minutes ago, about maybe 5 minutes in, we pitched you the essential question: how can the shift to a skills-based curriculum be used to facilitate a common understanding and approach to effective social studies instruction? And we've really tried to show you kind of those two pathways: developing that common understanding, developing that common approach. So those are two pathways. But there's two other pathways as well. And it's kind of the development of curriculum resources and the development of supporting teachers through the creation of documents, but also the professional development and the one-on-one conversations that we have, and how we are constantly pulling back to those documents we developed. So what we're really trying to do is provide resources within the county and connect people with resources that exist nationally, but we're also trying to constantly change mindsets. We're not just interested in changing, well, we want to add this and we want to add that. Ultimately, our goal is to change a mindset, because if we can change a mindset, then we have a teacher has completed the shift. They don't necessarily need us as much as maybe some other teachers.
I also think that it's important to mention there are several other slides that are tacked on because we wanted to give you the tandem of the PD that married with it. I built you a timeline. I included links and examples. And it was a twofold piece because, as you know, people can learn and accept PD if they're in it. If they do the curricular revision, they like it, but they do need to have some support and development. What are you thinking? What questions do you have?
Hi, I am an instructional leader for grades 6 through 8. I have an interesting range. I have different meetings I go to for SPED, related art, things like that. Is this something that could be implemented for, like, I guess, related art teachers is what I'm kind of asking? Like, is this something, because I know sometimes related art teachers can feel a little bit left out, because their music or their health and PE. But I'm trying to find ways to work in and incorporate the skill practice throughout the entire building, even if it's only like once a week or, once a term, just to get that, writing practice, reading practice to happen in even the areas, that are more disciplined on like arts and things like that. So is this something that could kind of be tailored toward that too?
I've got a really quick response and then I'll let Kate expound on that. I would say not from a social studies standpoint, but from a standpoint of backwards design. Jay McTighe and Grant Wiggins wrote Understanding by Design, I think in like 96 or 98. But the idea of backwards design has existed since 1949, since Ralph Tyler wrote about it. And if nothing else, I would take teachers through an experience of walking through backwards design and asking them a series of questions to try to get their mind around what they want students to be able to really do at the end of their course.
I think that's really where we started too, Scott, being able to say, what do we want our students to be able to know and do? And I think that's what you're talking about, practicing those skill sets that exist, not just in one discipline. They cross over. They don't just look like one thing. But if we're going to ask kids to do it well, we all need to have a common message. And if you are thinking about that process with your team, think about that common message. Is it a building-wide initiative? Is it one department within your related arts? Or is it a bigger school initiative? And how do you work together for that common vision so that you're working in unison? Because that we know is better for our kids. I also want to remind you, Scott and I shared our content and contact information on the first slides. One of my greatest joys over the past year in this experience has been working with a district in Texas. Scott and I spoke with her, with Ms. Larson and her contacts, Ms. Duckworth, in a school district just a bit north of Dallas. And they 2 years ago attended a session at NSSA and wanted to do this work. And just this past summer, after a hiatus of not talking with each other for several months, she sent us what was an amazing overhaul to their curriculum with focus on transfer goals, inclusion of rubrics, and a picture of what it should look like in their school district. It was different than ours, as it should be, but the picture worked seamlessly for them in a way that allowed them to integrate skills and focus on content, but shift the culture of their system slowly and purposefully. And I think that was a really rewarding conversation and experience for her, also led by teachers. And I just can't wait to hear where they're able to go with their work. And for each of you as well, it's not always easy, but it keeps us in the job because the job is never done.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your experiences with us. You gave us a whole lot to think about. So thank you both so very much. And thank you all for joining us here this evening and just being with us and letting Social Studies School Service be a part of your ongoing professional learning. Thank you again to Kate and Scott for sharing your expertise with us. And everyone, you can have a great afternoon or great evening.